Welcome back to another edition of Politics for the Culture. I'm your host, Senator Dwight Bullard. Happy to be on the show. Happy to be back with the audience once again. As previous shows have gone, I want to remind folks to peek the pen. The lapel pin is always going to tell the story of where we are in the moment. For those who can zoom in, the lapel pin for the next couple episodes is the logo of the infamous rap group Public Enemy, because we're going to be fighting the power for the next few episodes. We also are going to be joined by a number of dynamic women over the course of the next few episodes. And so I'm wearing my Angela Davis icon shirt, the revolutionary Dr. Professor Abolitionist Angela Davis is going to be kind of the guiding principle on today's show. I'm lucky to be joined on this episode with someone I get to call a colleague, friend, movement leader in her own right, but someone who I think is going to add a particular element of importance around this particular episode. As we all know, what's been going on with masked men going around snatching up folks off the streets, the real political violence being faced by immigrant communities and non-immigrant communities across the United States in this particular political moment. I have the honor and privilege of being joined by none other than Tessa Petit, Executive Director of the Florida Immigrant Coalition. Welcome to Politics for the Culture, Tessa.
Thank you, Dwight. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I hope I can be helpful for the people listening in.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we want to really kind of provide some context for the conversation. As I kind of alluded to in the beginning, since January of this year, we've seen the Trump administration really take direct violent action towards really the rounding up, the sweeping up of both documented and undocumented persons through these immigration raids. When you think about your work in the immigration space for as long as you've been in it, have you seen or experienced something like this before? And kind of what makes this moment different than experiences in the past when it's come to the notion of deportations or the really what I qualify as the dehumanization of folks in this moment? What for you makes this moment structurally different?
There has been historically a lot of deportation in the United States, right? Back in 2006, 7, and 8, we had the same issue of people being snatched from their home in the middle of the night, right? So it's nothing new. I think the difference is twofold. One is we have an advantage now where, thank God, there are phones, there are cameras, people are able to record and share what is happening. So there is more public knowledge. But the other piece is also the intent behind it, and that in the past there was maybe an intent that targeted it was because of the immigration process. Right now we see that the intent is really racial because it is intentional attacks on particular groups that are non-white. And the also in the past there were very clear laws around only arresting people who had an order of deportation, and also prioritizing people with a criminal background. But now, and there was also the due process and the rule of law where racial profiling was not allowed, even in the cases of deportation, which is what we're seeing now, where actually racial profiling is encouraged. So at this point, anybody who's not white, who looks like they come from another country, or if you get to speak and they realize that you have an accent, you're subject to being picked up and deported. And we've seen that with a lot of US citizens who, even after declaring or proving that they're a US citizen, are detained for days. So it's very different because it feels like it's not just about immigrants, it's also about all people of color.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely. I really want to kind of follow that line of the racial profiling aspect. Recently, uh, the Trump administration has put the target on the backs of Somali folks in Minnesota as kind of the most recent group that they're vilifying. When we think about this moment where the Supreme Court has now ruled that it's okay to racially profile, could you kind of touch on the dangers for non-white folks in this moment, kind of across the board, right? Like it feels different for me in the context being, Black American, that it feels like anyone could be victimized at any moment, given the current conditions. So could you touch on the kind of day-to-day experience for non-white folks in the United States with this militarized presence of ICE and what that looks like and feels like for folks?
So it feels like, and I think it's kind of what you think they're hearing, law enforcement orders, the soldiers, the state guards, national guards. It feels like what they're hearing is anyone who is not white represents a danger, and it's kind of they're coming at everyone, whether you are an immigrant or not. If you're not white, they're coming at you as you're a criminal before proven innocent. And the danger for folks is that living in the US, we get comfortable. Now, the United States has become very diversified, right? It's first you have the whites, then with the slaves, you had the Black Americans, and then you also have the Native Americans. Now we're finding Native Americans getting arrested because they're not white, because they have the indigenous appearance, right? And to them, anybody who's not white does not belong in the United States. That is the feeling. Now, the for anyone who is not white, there is a possibility that you may get stopped by law enforcement, whether it is a traffic violation. And most of the arrests in Florida, for example, are through traffic violations, right? So if there is a traffic violation, you get arrested, and there you are having to prove your right to be in the U.S. So what we try to recommend to people, it is, and it's for their own protection. We want everybody to know their constitutional rights as people on U.S. territory. We want people to understand that constitutional rights are not just for U.S. citizens. Constitutional rights are for people on U.S. territory. You need to know your rights, because if you don't know that you have the right to not answer certain questions, if you don't know that you have the right to not answer a question about your immigration status or your citizenship status in this country, then you may end up saying the wrong thing. And by saying the wrong thing, you may end up in detention. Now, immigration detention in Florida and across the country, they're not luxury five-star detention facilities, right? These are places where people are shackled for hours. Some people are staying shackles for over 24 hours without access to bathroom, access to food and drinks, right? These are places where people are mistreated. In some cases, people are tortured. We've had cases of folks who have been put in the sun for 6, 7, 8 hours in a cage because they dared to ask a question or reply to a security guard. This is the type of treatment that they receive. And we want everybody to know their rights. And you have to exercise and make sure that the law enforcement officer that you're dealing with is aware of the fact that you know your right and that you have the right to not respond. Otherwise, your rights are going to be violated because the rights of immigrants are being violated, and you're just going to go through the process. We also want everyone who is not white to be aware of their environment. You need to be you need to be aware of every step, every action that you take, because from the get-go, you are the enemy. From the get-go, you are dangerous. From the get-go, you're not supposed to be here, right? So we want to raise awareness around that and tell people, don't think that just because you're a citizen or because you have a real ID, right? God forbid you don't have a real ID yet, um, that you're safe. Also, a lot of Americans don't have a US passport, and most people don't even know where their birth certificate is. So, outside of your driver's license or your ID, there is nothing else that can prove your citizenship. And between then and the time where you get an opportunity to prove your US citizenship, a lot of mistreatment can happen. And a lot of your rights will be violated.
So you touched on earlier about this notion of due process. For folks who are tuning in, and of course it feels like everyone should feel like an expert at this point because it feels like this has been going on for forever, even though it's just been about a year or less than actually. Um, a lot of folks are hearing about these deportations to these foreign prisons like El Salvador or South Sudan. And then they're also seeing folks kind of snatched up in the hallways of courtrooms, right? Could you speak to like the way the process is supposed to work, right? Are people has this always been a thing? Like even in the world of deportations 20 years ago, were people being sent to foreign locations? The idea of somebody, on their pathway to citizenship, doing a check-in, for whatever reason, being snatched up outside a courtroom, that just seems abnormal. And so could you kind of speak to what people are kind of witnessing in real time in those two instances? Do people normally get sent to these faraway places? Why is that unique? And then why are people being violated when they're going in for their checkups or their check-ins, really? And why does that feel abnormal in the moment?
So, third country removal did not exist before. It wasn't current. It wasn't a common thing. And even in the past, for example, where when they didn't have a deportation agreement with a country like Cuba, they did not deport Cubans because they couldn't send them to another country, right? When there were issues in Haiti at some point where they couldn't send deportation flights to Haiti, they couldn't send Haitians to other countries. And what they did is being very aware that they would have issues with certain countries to send people back, they sign agreements with third countries. And those third country agreements really, these are countries that took money to receive people with no accountability for the well-being of these folks and no system to actually integrate them into their society. So these are people whose only crime was to be an immigrant with a with a status that where they're still in limbo in the United States, and they end up in a country that, in those countries, a lot of them are known for violent treatment of their prisoners, and their life is then hangs in the with an unknown future because they are kept in detention for an extended amount of time, and in many cases, and in cases of the folks who were sent to especially African countries who were sent pretty far, and we saw what happened, right, with the prison in El Salvador, where it was clear they were tortured, but also in African countries, the family members tell you that these people completely disappear because then there is no system in those countries, and there was no agreement that these people were going to be treated humanely. So basically, once they get there, they disappear. There is also the complete disregard for the person's future or life. One of the things that people don't realize is happening. A lot of folks who are in detention, who are Spanish speakers and even Haitians, were not from Latin America. They are taken, if they are in detention in Texas, they are taken across the border by bus to Mexico and dropped there. They are not Mexican citizens. They are not entitled to any status in Mexico, and they are dropped there. They're seeing a lot of Cubans and a lot of Venezuelans and Haitians being dropped at the Mexican border on the northern side of Mexico. This is very unusual. Not unusual. This is unthinkable because we never had it before. Now, the second piece about people being picked up at their check-ins, there are immigration laws for a reason, right? And those laws, though broken, not perfect, they had a lot of problems, and we've been fighting for years to change them, to improve them. Well, what we've seen is that even the little bit of law that existed, they are disregarding them completely. So you have people going to their check-in who came in using a platform that the Biden administration created that allowed them to come in, right, under the condition that they would check in regularly with an immigration officer. You have people who have been going through check-ins for months, some for years. We also have folks who had been here, had a regulated status, were either permanent residents, committed a crime, paid their dues to society, but because they had a felony or something, they were required to go and check in. It's like a parole visit, right? They were meeting their parole officer to make sure that they remain in check so that they could keep their work permit and their status here. Well, now these people, even though the law prescribed that they may at some point, I think after 10 years, regain their status. These people are now being picked up at their check-in and being deported without any explanation. In our court system, what we're seeing is people are showing up for their court appointment and the immigration judge is dismissing the case. If you cannot afford an immigration officer, an immigration lawyer, which is very expensive, your case gets dismissed and you don't know to appeal the dismissal on the spot, then you automatically have an order of deportation. And these people are being picked up right outside of the court. I can tell you, I'm going to give you an example of due process, right? When I came into the United States in 2001, I applied for political asylum. My asylum was denied by the immigration officer. So I requested to go in front of an immigration judge to appeal the officer's decision. And I showed up in front of the immigration judge and eventually, after a lengthy process, got my asylum. In a current moment, what would have happened is that I would have walked into that court and the immigration judge would have dismissed my case and I would have been picked up outside of the room. So when we talk about not implementing, respecting due process and the rule of law, they're completely disregarding it. And it's very hard for immigration lawyers to make a valid case or even to fight to keep people in this country. Because when you end up in detention, what's happening to a lot of folks who are in detention with a lawyer, the minute they realize that person has a lawyer, they start moving them to another state. They will move them to Florida, from Florida to Louisiana to Texas, to like they move them around. And when you're in another state, you can no longer have the protection and the support of your immigration lawyer, and you become an easy target for them, and you quickly get on the list to be deported.
Wow. So just really a complete disregard for the humanity of people in this space. As a Haitian immigrant yourself, right? We've seen the rhetoric ramp up around very specific, kind of targeted, what the president refers to as shithole countries, unfortunately become kind of the dominant narrative. From a personal perspective, right? As someone who not only advocates for immigrant groups, but has an immigrant story herself, when you see this, and we saw it in the first term as well, but now seeing it kind of weaponized in the second term, you know, how do you reconcile that, right? Like, you're out here trying to advocate for at least some notion of the American dream for folks to to experience this thing. You've gone through a particular process yourself that affords you citizenship, and then you see this person who now you can either vote for or against, who's supposed to serve as the representative of the United States, as the ambassador to the world to some degree, get up here and just basically say that the country you came from, really has no place. Being a country has no redeeming qualities whatsoever. Even though we know that to not be the case, how do you sit with that, knowing what it is that you're trying to do for others in this moment?
Well, a couple of things I've learned over the years. First is that racism is a form of ignorance. It's a proof of a certain level of ignorance, right? Targeting Black people, targeting Black countries, or making comments on disrespectful or dehumanizing a group of people or a country that has actually contributed to your freedom, right, in the United States, coming from the person it's coming from, no, I'm not surprised. From the current administration and the person that are part of that administration, and knowing people like Stephen Miller and all of these groups that are, their purpose is whitewashing the United States, I am not surprised. Speaking Haiti as saying we're a shithole country, you know what? That's your opinion, right? That's their personal opinion. I don't allow it to touch me directly. What saddens me is that, knowing the situation in Haiti, knowing that many of us are here because it's a question of survival. It's a question of it's life or death situation. When I came to the United States, it's not because I wanted to. It's because I did not have a choice, right? And a lot of us Asians who are here is because we don't have a choice. When you listen to the news, you realize that this is a country in complete despair. When you listen to the number of gender-based violence, the number of sexual abuse against children, you think about the number of deaths that are happening, that are coming from gangs. And when you think about the overall picture, right? When you're a country like Haiti, for example, where the gangs have U.S. military grade weapons. We don't make weapons in Haiti. And if these are weapons that are made for the U.S. Army, how come they are in Haiti? We also know that 70 to 80% of the weapons that go to the gang in Haiti come out from right here in Florida. So hearing that from someone who refuses to take accountability as a president of a country, if you refuse to take accountability for the impact that your country has on your neighborhood countries, then this is just a sign of, to me, it's a weakness, right? And I'm not going to dwell on it. But what I'm going to have a problem with is, you don't just focus on one Black nation. If you see the list to bring from 19 countries who have a ban to 30, they are 70 or 80% of them are African countries. All of these countries are countries of with Black folks in them. So let's be clear. This is not. He probably heard somebody say something about Haiti, and he decided, you want, let me run with it. Let me repeat it to sound smart, but it didn't sound smart. But the reality is, when you look at the bans and when you look at the things that the then administration that has to push back or implement is choosing to implement, when you see that DHS is choosing to implement the ban on those 19 countries, and then now going to add more countries, and that these countries are not white nations, they are Black folks. When you hear them say that they will stop asylum for every country except Afrikaners, the message is clear, right? This is about race. So where I get more enraged is the attack on people of color, the attack on Black people, which this is what's the most upsetting piece for this, because immigration laws were created across in the UN, across the nation, across the world, to protect people who need to move from one country to another to protect their lives. Because there was a clear understanding that a human life, no matter what country you are from, no matter the color of your skin, you have the right to migrate to protect your life because every single human life is valuable. Now, as a black woman, it is offensive to see that somebody, just because of the color of their skin, dares to think that I am less than them. And my hope is that most Americans will understand. It must have learned by now, right? That we're all equal. The color of your skin can be justified scientifically why you have that skin color, right? If we go from the beginning of times, why people were black, red, short, tall, white, right? Based on the environment they were born in back in the days. So it's racism will always offend you. And I hope that racism will offend all Americans. I know that's not the fact. I know that racism exists in this country, but that's the most offensive piece of it. And then the last one I'm gonna say is because of some unjustified bias or because of a lack of knowledge or understanding or just because of racism, choosing to put the lives of hundreds of thousands of people at risk. We're talking about over 300,000 Haitians on TPS. We're talking about in Florida alone, almost 100,000 Haitians who have permanent legal resident status, right? And if we take the whole United States, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people that you're threatening to send back to a country where there is not only gang violence, there is a very shaky, we could say absence, but because they're there, they have the title of shaky governance. But there is also a lot of violence. There is also famine. So it's thinking about taking people to their death, whether it's going to be by gun violence, by famine. You're exposing them to poverty because there are no jobs. These are people going back to a country where they're not going to be able to work. So it's the lack of humanity and consciousness and the lack of recognition for the value of human lives. That's what saddens me and angers me at the same time.
And that's real. That's real. And that is why you do the work that you do, because you want to try and change the world. So I want to thank you, Tessa, for being on Politics for the Culture. Before we close out, we always try to end with a little bit of the culture, right? And of course, there is a ongoing debate globally around which culture has the best food. I would assume you have a bias. So
yes, undoubtedly Haitian food.
So I want you to lean into that bias and give what I like to call your Haitian cuisine top 5. If someone had to experience Haitian food culture, what are the 5 food items that someone would need to experience in order to find the joy and deliciousness that is Haitian food culture?
All right. So I think a lot of people know the griot, which is the fried pork, which is a very common dish when it comes to Haitian food. Folks are familiar with legumes. There is also what we call Julia lalo, which is I don't know how to say lalo in English, but it's rice with some greens. It's rice with greens. We also have, which is a northern dish. In the north of Haiti, we cook with cashews, right? And in the south we cook with okra kalaloo. So I would recommend folks with having a chicken with cashews from the northern side, and or having a chicken with okra, which is an okra based gravy. And last but not least, my very favorite, which is our julie john john, which is the Haitian black rice.
Which is my favorite as well. So I'm right there with you. So thank you once again. How can folks find out about the Florida Immigrant Coalition, and where can they get more information if they want to help out, participate, be an ally?
Our website is the flic.org, flic.org. Our events are there, how people can join, can volunteer, can join our community hubs, where we're creating hubs that protect immigrant communities at a community level. They can volunteer for our naturalization clinics. We're still helping people naturalize. Of course, we naturalize people from all countries, not just Haiti. And also donate. But the most important part is get involved somewhere, get involved somehow. We have our Pink Squad, which is Protect Immigrant Neighbors and Communities, that teaches folks how to accompany immigrants in court hearings, how to be a legal observer if you see enforcement, and also how to share your voter education and get other people civically engaged. The reality is, we wouldn't be here if people understood what voting meant.
Well, thank you for being on Politics for the Culture, Tessa. Probably won't be your last time, considering the fact that we'll probably be dealing with this administration for a little bit. So, but thank you for coming on and appreciate you so much.
And thank you for having me, Dwight.